Welcome to the RSP cast, and today, hey, look, man, it's kind of like a reunion podcast here with our old friend Dwain McFarland, former RSP writer, and of course, you know, head of content over at do I have that right? What's your official?
So,
You're
yeah,
the
Jordan Fiegelman. Yeah, is he's chief content officer.
All right, Jordan.
I am director over data and analytics. But yeah, I'm obviously churning out content.
Yeah,
conturds. I'm turning out turning out conturds. I hope they're better than turds. So
yeah,
my articles are better than turds.
Well, if isn't there some special turd that people use to drink like the finest coffee with or something? So
Man,
if that's it,
I don't even want to know.
Yeah, I don't even want to know either. But I'll just say this, obviously we love having Dwain every time he can come back and do a show with us, and it's kind of funny this week because we were thinking about doing content, what we were going to do for this show, and I realized that if there was anybody or any pairing of people that I think that could do like a 60-hour marathon of a podcast and probably just only be just tired and still have things to talk about, probably be Dwain and I. So we actually limited this to players we're higher on, lower on, and uncertain about, and then our surprise offense, and we're only picking 3 each. So we're going to try and cover 24 players in the time that we have available. But, Dwain, of course, big welcome back. It's always great getting to do this with you.
No, man, I'm so happy to be here. And obviously, I always have a special place in my heart, like for you. When I was first trying to break into this industry, like you were someone that, gave me a chance and just, allowed me to really be me, which is what I really appreciated. And you gave me a lot of great advice as well. But you always just really steered me towards, doing my thing, and doing what I was passionate about. And I think that, without having the mentors that we get along the way in these things, like it just makes it so much harder. And you just really helped me honestly speed up the process in a lot of ways. So, I'm just very thankful. And, even more so, like we've just become great friends.
Yeah.
Like you're somebody I can just call, and our conversations on the phone, I think, are sometimes longer than our pods. So I feel like I've got a lifelong friend, and I'm very thankful, man. So, and I'm so happy to be here. We're overdue.
Right. Hey, man, right back at you. You're one of my favorite people in this industry and one of my favorite people in life. And it's been so much fun to be able to see what you were able to do. Cause obviously, it was easy to just say, just be yourself, because what you were doing was as strong as anybody's content that's out there, and it's original, and you're good either in writing or on air. And so we're gonna leverage that right now that we've had the bro fest for the past couple of minutes here. But let's start with who we're higher on. Who are you higher on than ADP based on the work that you've done thus far and what you're observing and why? Who's your first person? Then we'll go back and forth.
Yeah, for me, the top one, and I mostly tried to confine it to players going in the top 10 rounds. I definitely have some later, but draft capital, is not linear. So if you have a pick, if you're above 20 spots in ADP, like on a round 13 player, right?
Yeah,
that's not as significant as if you're 5 or 6 spots ahead of on like a third rounder, right?
Yeah.
Because those are your most valuable picks. So I kind of tried to limit it to that. And I will preface that I'm referring to underdog ADP right now. So there'll be some little differences, because that is best ball, where everybody always takes at least 2 quarterbacks and things like that. But overall, that's one of the best parts about underdog is like, wow, we actually have skin in the game where there's thousands and thousands of drafts that have already happened. Used to we'd be scrounging around like, God, where's this guy gonna go? Oh, I found an ADP source where there were 2 drafts, or you're looking at mock drafts where everyone quits by round 3, and it's a farce. So
they can't pronounce the guy's name, so they're drunk.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. So Nick Chubb, and early on, I was not as high on Nick Chubb. So my process is I work through my rankings first, and rankings are based off of a talent profile plus the team environment. But I don't dig super deep into all the nitty gritty little details and things that go along with that. My projections, I do that next. And that's usually how that goes, Matt. That's a 2 to 4 week process, where I'm working through different teams at different times, and you're just turning over every single stone. So there's always my first ranks to my second ranks are always where my biggest jumps occur. So I put up my first set of ranks in May. I had Nick Chubb, I think RB7, not RB. I had him like player 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there. He was still in my top 6 or 7 running backs. But after I did this, I was just like, there's no way that I can hold Nick Chubb out of the number 3 running back spot. Like, I have him above Bijan Robinson. And, the talent profile we already knew. Like, that wasn't something new that popped up to me, late in the projection process. Like, the guy's amazing. We know that, right? Yards after contact, missed tackles forced, explosive rush rate, man. Last year, Matt, 16% of his carries went for 10+ yards. Like, this guy's, and the thing is, he's been doing this his whole career.
Almost quietly.
He's going to be. Yeah, it has been quietly. Well, now you have Kareem Hunt gone, right? So the way I look at Nick Chubb, I don't even know that he will for sure get more rushing attempts than last year, because I think the Browns are going to throw the ball more. So some of what he would pick up from Kareem Hunt being gone in the run game is actually probably going to be offset by the fact that they throw the ball a little bit more, right? They've been rumored to say they want to do that with Deshaun. All of their offseason moves have followed that. You trade for Elijah Moore. You don't have a lot of draft capital. You use your first pick in the draft. It was only a 3rd rounder, but it was their first pick because they didn't have any picks due to the Deshaun trade. They go for Cedric Tillman. And everything we're hearing out of the mini camps and everything is about the installation of, not installation. They already same offense, but how they want to throw the ball more, right? And it's much more about tempo and all these things. So there's going to be some things offset. But the way I look at it is Nick Chubb, like, without Kareem Hunt, without Dearness Johnson, all we have is Jerome Ford. Even if I don't think he could get to 350 carries, it's just hard to project him below anyone else when I am pretty sure he's going to get 300. And I'm not projecting him for a huge target share, but he's going to be on the field more on passing downs. Like, I still think, Deshaun's going to scramble. Deshaun's going to try to push the ball down the field. He's not going to check it down as much, but he's going to pick up some receptions. So I just feel like it's hard to take a player that's going to have 300 carries and as good as Nick Chubb and be like, I'm just going to put Bijan Robinson over him. They have a great offensive line. They could be one of the most improved offenses in the league. I truly believe Nick Chubb could be the number 1 running back in fantasy this year. And if the Browns aren't, throwing the ball as well as they want, or if some of this stuff is just fluff about them throwing more, they've got the offensive line, Matt, that they could run more of a offense like the 49ers or something like that, where they just make their passing game about efficiency, right? Not about running a lot more plays. And that means play action, but it means more running for Nick Chubb. So I just feel like there's so many outs. Like, if the offense goes that way, then suddenly they're like, holy crap, Nick Chubb is going to have 350 carries and he's going to have more catches than he's ever had. So I just think when you have a player that's as talented as him, there's so many ways to get there. And he's been doing it his whole career just on efficiency. Now, like, the volume is guaranteed. We don't have to worry about, Kareem Hunt. So it's just one of those things where I'm not necessarily saying, oh my God, he has to be your RB1. I just don't see how you take Bijan Robinson over him, though. I think Bijan has way more questions around how Arthur Smith is going to use him.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I have Chubb number 5 on my board as running back and 15th overall. And I have him really, I have it in a situation where I have Deshaun Watson throwing for 4,200 yards this year. And close to 30 touchdowns. So I'm looking at that as an increase, from what we saw last year. With Chubb, I have him, 280 attempps. I have him at 42 targets and about 32 receptions. So we're looking at close to a little over 1,700 yards of offense and double-digit touchdowns total. I do have a fairly healthy stat total for Jerome Ford, but that's being optimistic that the Browns are going to probably going to run the ball over 400 times and accumulate about 2,000, 2,100 yards on the ground, and then maybe about another 400 in aerial offense total. I think that's a little bit on the aggressive side, to be honest. But I see Jerome Ford as a player who could maybe get a share of the Kareem Hunt role, but it's not going to be the Kareem Hunt role. It's not going to be as high of a volume, and that does benefit Chubb from that perspective. But I totally see where you're coming from when you say, Yeah, they're probably not going to run the ball as much, but he's going to be highly efficient. So if anything, but when I look at, when I look at my rankings overall, even if we just don't talk about the projections itself in the weeds, I've got McCaffrey, Eckler, Barkley, and I have one other guy just ahead of Chubb that I'm going to talk about who I'm, higher on, but there's a great deal of uncertainty that I have about him. I could easily see Chubb as the number 3 runner on my board within the next month as things start to shape.
I have him 8 spots above ADP overall, so I have him as the number 9 player overall on my board. So
nice.
I'm taking him in a lot of drafts. I've done about 115 underdog drafts, and since I've made these updates over the last 2 weeks, I find it really hard. I was already taking Nick Chubb in the middle of round 2 and at the end of round 2. Now I'm really mixing him into my teams in the early second round. I don't have to take him in the first round because he doesn't go there. So you don't have to do that. But it makes it really hard for me to pass on him, in round 2. And I think there is a ceiling for him to be the number 1 player in fantasy, period, this year. Because he's just good. He's a freaking awesome player.
He used to have. You could always see that, well, wow, if Kareem Hunt gets hurt, this guy with this offensive line could be a 2,000-yard rusher. There's always, you could see it in the back of your mind of where it would go. Now it's crept up a little bit more where you go, there's now without Hunt, he certainly can be in the same class as Derrick Henry in terms of rushing yards, the way Henry has been in recent years.
I have him very similar. This is kind of a similar. That's the perfect comp, right?
Yeah.
A guy that's not. I don't have him for a huge target share. I have him for 7%.
Yeah.
I don't have him playing 17 games. I've only got him playing 15. So it's I do that to all my running backs, but I feel great about him, and I think there's room for him to get a better target share than 7%. Right? Because we don't know what Elijah Moore is going to do for sure. We don't know if Cedric Tillman's going to be ready for year 1. Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's okay.
He's
really
Chris
the only
Conley.
Guy. Yeah. The only guy that we really know is a good receiver there that can demand looks is Amari.
Yep.
So everything after that's kind of up for grabs. So I think there's a chance that if those guys are not as good as the Browns want them to be, then we could easily see Chubb be at a 12% target share.
Yeah.
And if I change that in my projection model, well, now you're talking about a guy that is the number 1 running back in fantasy.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Cooper. Cooper was 4th on my list of 3 to talk about that I'm higher on because I looked, you saw what he did last year, and I think a full year with Watson, puts that in mind. But the guy that I have higher than I think I'm seeing on ADP is the rookie Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I look at Seattle, and I understand that when you look at what they've done in the past, they've done a lot of 2 tight ends. They run the ball a fair bit. But when I look at I think there's a difference between what they did and what they wanted to do. Because when it was Shane Waldron, they got over from the Rams. And the Rams love to run the 11 personnel offense. And 3 years ago, they drafted Eskridge in the second round. And he's that guy who could play slot and outside, unbelievably, a really good big play guy. Massive concussion year 1. And then second year he failed to emerge, kind of nicked up a little bit, but also just really didn't acclimate fast enough. So when you draft Jaxon Smith-Njigba in the first round, and his metrics profile has a lot of similarities to guys like Cooper Kupp, his route skills are very strong. His release skills are also very strong. And you're not this is not going to be at the expense of Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf. It's it's going to be at the expense of the tight ends. So when Pete Carroll says something to the effect when asked, are you going to use, what about your tight ends or what about your offense? He's not going to say, well, we really didn't want to use our tight ends the past 2 years. We didn't really, or D. Eskridge really kind of screwed us when he got hurt and we couldn't do what we wanted to do. There's some coaches who say that, but most of them aren't in the league for very long and get away with it. You've got to be prepared for the fact that you may need those tight ends. you may need D. Eskridge. So you got to keep them motivated and say, well, we're going to keep those guys involved, and we're really excited about what's going on with them, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But you don't draft Jaxon Smith-Njigba in the first round, have a former Rams coordinator, and run an offense where you're not going to feature him as your Cooper Kupp-esque type of player in terms of role. So I anticipate, when I look at Jaxon Smith-Njigba, I see a player who can come right in and be a red zone threat in the way that they used Cooper Kupp in the red zone, and be a high volume guy. I'm projecting 105 targets for him this year, and I see him as a 70 catch player in the realm of 800 to 900 yards and about somewhere between 5 and 7 touchdowns. I'm at 6 touchdowns right now. For me, that's that's a second or third wide receiver that you're going to take off the board. You don't have to take him there, but I think you're going to get that kind of volume out of him. So I'm higher on him than most. When I look at my board with him, I have him ranked right now as, let's see, he's my 30th receiver on my board. And that's that's about a half a round higher than where he's going right now. But when it's overall in terms of where I've got him placed, it's even more of a stark difference, in terms of ADP. I'm really about 2 rounds higher than where a lot of people are, in terms of drafting him.
Yeah. So JSN is like just one of the most fun players to talk about. There's also just a really wide range of outcomes for him. There is some uncertainty because, Pete Carroll likes to run the ball and he does this stuff with the tight ends. But I agree with you. In my projections, I have them going to a 3-wide offense because historically, while coaches will show really strong trends around certain things, trend breakers are players. And JSN is a trend breaker as a player. You're not going to draft him in the first round and take him off the field. And if you do, you're an idiot. And the opposing defense will say, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can sleep better at night now, knowing that I don't have to play against DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba on 45% of the plays because you want to run your 2 tight end set. Yeah. Thanks, Pete.
Yeah.
So I just don't see him doing it. As stubborn as he may be about certain things, they can still run and do all the other things they want to do out of 11 personnel. You already mentioned they've got the right coordinator to do that. Shane Waldron knows how to run, McVay's offense. Now he's not necessarily the play calling sequencer that
Sure.
McVay is, which was really a lot of the magic sauce we never talk about is about sequencing and setting things up, not just knowing a playbook. But still, I think it is going to unlock the 11 personnel. And in fact, I have Jaxon Smith-Njigba at an 80% route participation. I've got DK Metcalf at 87%, and I've got Lockett at 85%. So I have them playing 11 personnel, period. And I thought long and hard about this one because, when I'm doing my projections, I'm really looking for medians. But I just really had a hard time forcing myself into any scenario where I was like, oh, yeah, Jaxon Smith-Njigba at 60%. It just doesn't make any sense. And he's just the kind of player that I'm willing to be wrong on.
Exactly.
He's so good. Like in the wide receiver supermodel that I created over at Fantasy Life, he came out 90th percentile. That's one of the best receivers we've seen in the last 7 years. I hear a lot of people, oh, well, he can't do this. He can't create explosive plays. You don't know what you're talking about. He had one of the highest explosive play rates, which is basically how many of your targets you turn into 15-plus yard receptions in the last 7 years.
If we're going to talk breakaway plays, that's a different story. But we're talking over 40 yards, and who's keeping track of that?
He's not going to get out there and run. Yeah, he's not, and we don't want him to.
Yeah.
But this is the same thing you get with Cooper Kupp. You see how many big plays Cooper Kupp makes. You see how many big plays Amon-Ra St. Brown makes. That's the kind of player that JSN is. And we, honestly, you don't want players on your fantasy team, at least not that you're drafting highly. Just you don't want the guys that are out there running go routes all the time. They don't get targeted that often.
Yeah.
You want the guys that are catching the ball, against zone coverage in between the linebackers and safeties. NFL plays zone 70% of the time, and I do think it's going to be JSN's role. Having said all this, I love the player. I'm actually way in on Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He's my 4th rostered receiver. I've got right around 115 drafts done. I'm over that somewhere now, but 20% of my teams have JSN on them. So that's the fourth most out of everyone.
Yeah, like, down. I don't know whether it's a regional thing or not, Dwayne, but we can classify Pete Carroll as he may be dumb, but he ain't stupid, And I think that's basically what we can sum up is that Seattle may be dumb.
And Waldron's going to be in his ear, man.
Yeah,
like Waldron's going to be bugging him about this all the time. It's going to, even if Pete wants to do that, Waldron's going to be trying to wear him down. Like, look, once they see him in camp, and it's already been like glowing reviews, right? Yeah. But it's just, I don't see a way.
Yeah. Kobe Parkinson, Will Dissly, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. It's not even close. It's just, please. So, especially in the red zone, because the way that you can do things with running the ball, even from the slot, even with an 11 personnel set, they're going to have a lot more flexibility in the red zone to be able to run plays that are going to generate wide open looks for those receivers. So, who's your second guy that you're higher on?
My second guy is Christian Watson, who I'm really interested in, talking with you about, because essentially I think what's happening here, like, number one, we've got a small sample, but I think that people are still hanging on to like their thoughts about him in pre-draft, which does matter. Like, the way I grade year 2 receivers, their collegiate career still counts, but their rookie season now has more weight, right? And the way that I'm looking at what's going on. But he had the second round capital, but he came from the small school, so a lot of people were just out on him. And then the first thing folks will reference is they'll say, well, he just had a 15% target share last year. Well, in the games where he was fully healthy and he got to play a full-time role, he had a 23% target share in those games. So this is a guy that was earning targets. That is the number one indicator that a wide receiver is good. Now, there are layers after that, right? Okay, what can you do with said target? Where all can you earn the targets? Can you earn them in all areas of the field? There's a lot of things, but very basic level, if you're not good, your quarterback's not going to throw it to you. That's just kind of how it works. If you are good, like, your quarterback is going to throw it to you, regardless of the scheme. Like, that's just kind of the way it is. But with Watson, like, I think his target earning ability is better than what people think. And then you see the upside that he has. He is a player that can beat double. He can split safeties and corners, and still beat them deep, doing things like you see Tyler Lockett do in the past, right? Not very many players can split that and win over the top. So he has very deceptive speed. He looks a little crazy, I admit, when you watch him play. Like, things don't always seem perfectly in sync. You're like, how'd that work? But it works. We've seen him work over the middle. We've seen him work underneath. He's not just, and the other thing I hear referenced is, he's just a deep threat. Well, he caught a 7-yard slant and took it to the house from Jordan Love in his one start. I certainly know, because I'm a Cowboys fan. He toasted the Cowboys on crossers that were not all deep plays. So I don't know that he's the best route runner or anything, but I think he's a weapon. And he's only, he's a baby. He just came in the league. That's the other thing I hear is age. But we see this with guys that come from small schools. They don't come out of college early. Like, agents don't encourage guys from schools that, aren't big to come out early. You're going to need a full body of work, because the teams aren't going to be willing to take as much of a risk on you. Cooper Kupp was old when he came out, and he was coming from a small school. So this is the sort of thing that, you got to look at the full context, in my opinion, of the picture. And I know there are concerns with Christian Watson's hands and things like that, but really good players like this, even if their drop rate's slightly higher than the NFL average, it usually doesn't keep quarterbacks from throwing them the ball, because they're willing to take a few drops because they know the big plays can come. So I'm 7 spots ahead of ADP on Christian Watson. And out of all the wide receivers that are going, in the first 4 rounds of drafts, he is the one, actually after Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's my guy that I'm the highest on. I've got 17% exposure to him over on Underdog. After you get past those rounds, I have guys that I have a lot more of, but these are guys that have to go in the first 4 rounds of your draft that I'm using kind of as a qualifier. So I really like him. There are questions around Jordan Love, but Jordan Love just needs to not be terrible, right? For Christian Watson to give you a wide receiver 2 season. And that's where he's going, is a low end wide receiver 2, but I think he has high end wide receiver 2 upside. And if you get lucky, he has the skill set to give you wide receiver 1 production, because of the big plays, so I really like him. So interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I'm also exactly 7 spots above ADP.
Oh,
with
I thought you were going to try to
Watson.
calm me down on Watson.
No,
Like, damn it, Matt.
I'm a fan too. When I look at him, when you described how he can be a little wild and a little, he looks a little strange and crazy at times. Well, I remember Terrell Owens in his first couple of years, and that was very similar in that respect. I don't think he's
Another small school guy, Chattanooga.
Yeah, another small school guy. So, I mean, on that level, Javon Walker was another player who was kind of had to grow into his paws a bit, and things didn't work out for him long term due to off field. But his one good season, he was a monster, and I think that Christian Watson is kind of a Javon Walker type of player. That's who I compared him to pre-draft, stylistically. And yeah, the hands need a little bit of work, but you described that excellently. Couldn't agree with that more. And my biggest concern is just Jordan Love. That's really it, because he gets open. And when people talk about deep, that he just runs deep routes, let's remember that speed isn't the only thing that gets you open on a vertical route. You actually have to have some nuance as a route runner. And I know Patrick Peterson isn't the same player he once was, but if you're a rookie from a small school and you whip Patrick Peterson on a vertical route in your first game in the NFL, and yeah, it clanked off his hands. But I remember watching that play, and I was like,
that was right out of the gate.
Yeah, I was like, we're good to go. This kid can run a route. The routes that he knows how to run, he runs well, and he's going to get better. Like, it was all there for me to see with that exception. Then when he started to, show more consistency and get targets mid to late year, yeah, I'm with you. I mean, he may never
Listen to
be.
these finishes, Matt. 30. So this is PPR. He takes over the full-time. He had concussion problems, and he had soft tissue stuff. Yeah. After week 1, he got hurt in week 1. Week 2, he got hurt and missed week 3. Yeah. Right. Then he played very sparingly week 4 and 5, 18% and 21% of the routes, and he was on the injury report heading into those games. Then he gets shut down again. Then they kind of start to ramp him up. Week 8, he gets 8%. Week 9, 23%, and then week 10, boom, 88% route participation. 32.7 points. The next week, 78% route participation, 21.1 points. Next week, 21 points. Next week, 24.4 points. Yeah. Next week, 8.6. Then 11. He had a stinker in week 17 with 2, and then he finished out the season with a 17-point performance.
And let's remember, who was injured during training camp? Christian Watson. Mm-hmm. Everyone was talking about Romeo Doubs making a big play every week or every day in a session. No one was talking about Christian Watson because he couldn't get on the field. He wasn't even practicing. It was kind of like an Odell Beckham thing, or like some other guys who missed. A.J. Brown missed a good portion of his preseason too. So if you come in and you're doing all of what Dwayne just described, and you didn't even get the rapport with Aaron Rodgers from the summer because you're banged up, yeah, I'll take that all day as a player who's got a lot of growth potential ahead of him and is good right now. So for me, my second guy is Sam LaPorta. and I'm, I love Dalton Kincaid. Like, to me, I think Dalton Kincaid has the potential to be tight end 1 this year. Like, it's not a high end. I don't have a high level of confidence that will happen, but I think that there's a world where that could happen, and it's not as bizarre of a world people may envision. But Sam LaPorta, to me, I think is in the same neighborhood of where I rank Kincaid, which is as a low end tight end 1 right out of the gate. And the reason that is that people look at tight end and they think really that they mostly play inside and underneath, and they already have a guy in Amon-Ra St. Brown who does that. So how's that going to work out in terms of routes run? But from when you watch LaPorta's tape at Iowa, one of the things that he does really well is that they can put him outside on the perimeter and have him run short and intermediate routes, and he runs them with the efficiency of a wide receiver. I mean, in terms of the techniques that you're looking for to gain separation, he can win in that area of the field. So whether they want to use Amon-Ra St. Brown more on the outside or whether they're going to keep him on the inside, and they use LaPorta a little bit more as a short and intermediate perimeter player, I think you're going to see that LaPorta gets his targets aren't going to interfere as much with Amon-Ra St. Brown's volume as maybe some people may just hypothesize with that. And he's already starring well in camp. He's going to be a red zone factor. Maybe not a 10 touchdown player, but I think he can be, 5 to 7 touchdowns. I think he can get that out of the gate this year. And with his after the catch skill, his great zone route running in the middle of the field, and his ability again to match up outside on short and intermediate routes, I will not be surprised at all if he's the second or third leading receiver on the Detroit Lions this year.
Yeah, I also love LaPorta. I kind of make the joke that LaPorta earned his first target, while he was still in his mother's womb. Like this guy, and like to say that the offense he had to play in was bad is like an understatement.
Yeah.
in college, like. Yeah. I mean, he had major quarterback challenges. So when you look at a player like that, I think the primary thing you want to see is did they earn the targets, because they're clearly going to be lower in things like yards per route run, because the quarterback play impacts that. So you have to remember that. And this guy was just, he broke out really early. As a sophomore, he burst onto the scene. As a junior, he eclipsed the 20% dominator rating. Not to get all freaking nerdy here. He was only 20.6 when he did that. But then, as a senior last year, he had 32% of the team's targets, 34% of their yards. So sophomore, junior, and senior season, back to back to back. Like this guy was really, the main component to their offense. And I think he just has the upside to have a similar kind of role in the NFL. I mean, he checks a lot of, you don't see, honestly, tight ends break out and do a lot of the things he did so early and then be able to back them up each year. This was a really good tight end class. Michael Mayer had a similar profile, but not as athletic, right, as what you get with LaPorta. And I think that the Lions were pretty sharp, doing what they did. I know that surprised some people that they took him where they did, but I think he does have traits that make his ceiling higher. I think Michael Mayer is going to be a fine tight end in the NFL. Like I think he'll be somebody in fantasy in 2 to 3 years. You'll be, he finished as a tight end 10. Tight end 9, that kind of thing. And it'll be good. Like his upside is like to be like a kind of more like a Jason Witten if he really grows. But LaPorta's upside is he could be more like George Kittle, right? Because he has those explosive traits that could go on top of the target earning that Mayer doesn't have. So I just really love the ceiling. I agree with you too. Like I know tight ends don't typically break out, right, as rookies, but you also just have to take context. Like Matt, if we went like to a corner of somewhere in Detroit, right, for this team and said, hey, name the 3 tight ends on this roster, not name Sam LaPorta. Like no one could name any of them.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and that's nothing against these players, right? They are NFL players, but there's nothing standing in his way. Now, is he going to be ready to block and all that? I don't know. He probably will lose some snaps to, Brock Wright, on rundowns and things like that. But that doesn't really bother me. If he can get to 70% route participation, 75%, which I think is still very much in range for him as a rookie, but looking at this tight end room and his talent profile, I agree. And I think LaPorta, I got to look. And so if folks want to know, like I'm using the Best Ball Hub, it's over on Fantasy Life. You can get it for free. It's always free. We don't give it to you for free, so then you pay for something else. Everything on our site is for free. But all you have to do is go to Underdog and you request your CSV for your drafts. You come over to Fantasy Life as long as you just got an account, which all you have to do is get an email and a password. And then you can upload this, and you can upload it as often as you want, but it'll give you the breakdown of all your exposures to all your players. You can look at which players you've got paired the most often with them. So this is how I'm doing this, like on the fly as we're talking. The Sam LaPorta is my 3rd most rostered tight end. I've got 14% of my teams have Sam LaPorta on them. Darren Waller's my number 1 at 20%, but LaPorta's right there behind him.
Yeah, when I look at LaPorta, I think the distinction between Mayer and LaPorta is a very good one. And I think for me, when I break it down, is that Mayer was a very good zone route runner, but I don't see him being a matchup one-on-one type of matchup beater except in the red zone, which is why he can still have that Witten-like upside.
Yeah.
But that's, to me, how that works out on the field in terms of your explanation there. So who's your final guy that you're higher on?
Well, I'm going to let you pick. I'll give all three just so the audience has them. But I have Deontay Johnson 17 spots above ADP. I have Darren Waller 11 spots above ADP, and I have Nico Collins 13 spots above ADP. So your pick, Matt.
Okay, I want to, listen. I think
if you have one of these you don't like,
you
have one of these you don't like, pick that one.
Yeah, I know. Like I'll put it this way: Deontay Johnson, I understand why that can happen. So I think everyone else can too. Darren Waller's the same thing, even if whether you have varying degrees of confidence of him staying healthy and all that. So the most interesting one to me is Nico Collins. What is it about Nico that has you higher?
Yeah, so with Nico, he's one of these. I just didn't expect to be this high on him, but the data took me there, right? Okay. I really try to come into the process very unbiased. In fact, when I did my first pass of my rankings in May, I did not have Nico Collins as high as I have him, now that I did the projection process as well and dug into everything. There's a couple things, with Nico. He took a big step forward last year. As a rookie, he was not very good. But last year, he was playing through injuries last season as well. But he jumped to an 18% target share in the games that he played, which is really wide receiver 3 worthy going back to 2011, right? That's about the range of a wide receiver 3. But the other part is just looking at his air yards. 33% of the air yards for the Texans. That's wide receiver 1 worthy going back to 2011. So this is kind of how I start to try to look at players that they may be doing things and they weren't in a full-time role that are on par with like wide receiver 3s, 2s, or 1s, but they didn't quite have the role. And then when you look at the Texans, we've got John Mechie, we've got Robert Woods, we have Tank Dell. I feel like Collins is probably a lock to play X. And then I think you probably have Robert Woods starting off as the Z. And then you have Mechie and probably Tank Dell in some sort of a rotation. I do think Mechie could end up taking over for Robert Woods as the Z. I think he could do all those things. If Woods is healthy, though, and still doing his thing, like his data suggests that he's not a great player like he once was, but he's still capable, right, of keeping a younger guy off the field. We'll put it that way. But with Nico, like as I dug into it, the first thing I thought is, well, they were without Brandon Cooks. Did this just all come, when Brandon Cooks, was out? Now, even if it had, we shouldn't discount it because this is an error. If you ever hear someone doing this in fantasy football, it's wrong. It's not true. If they ever say something like, well, Amon-Ra St. Brown only had those 30% target shares because, TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift were hurt. So here's the thing. While you can get more targets when you have teammates that are good that are out, you can't suddenly be a 30% target share player unless you're a badass. Yeah. Because the opposing team doesn't want to let your best player do that. And after a few weeks, believe me, everyone knew that season that Amon-Ra was all that the Lions had, and they couldn't do anything about it. There's nothing they could do about it. So when you hear that, ignore it. Don't ever listen to.
It's a good point because the thing that I could anticipate someone saying about Nico is like, oh, well, they're going to bracket him more. They're going to roll the coverage over more towards his area. But they did, a good example of someone who couldn't achieve that target share after an early hot start for that exact reason, but it happened within the same season and they went downhill, was Chase Claypool. So
that's a good one,
he's a good example of a player who after week 6, defenses said, we got to pay attention to this guy, and then he never recovered. But with Cook, or with Collins, you can see that, they didn't make the adjustment. They couldn't make the adjustment.
And the other really nice thing is, and this is, thank you, True Media. So True Media is who we're working with as our data partner. And so we've partnered with PFF and True Media at Fantasy Life now. So all of our stuff will be based on that. And I can easily go in and just be like, okay, great. Well, what happened with Nico Collins? I just want to see when Nico Collins was on the field with Brandon Cooks, right? 24% target share with Brandon Cooks on the field.
Yeah.
So this wasn't just about, Brandon Cooks, not being out there. And again, he had to go earn it anyway. Now, I'm not saying Nico Collins is going to suddenly be a guy that, oh my God, he's your wide receiver 1. But I think you can get him in a range in the draft where wide receiver 4s and 5s are going, and you could be drafting a wide receiver 3. I think that's very much in his range of outcomes. surprising high end range is probably a wide receiver 2, but I think that he could be, actually, I'm projecting him. I think he will be a wide receiver 3 in fantasy football this season. Last year he was only out there for 75. He only had a 75% route participation due to some different things that were going on. So, I mean, this year I've got him projected at 85%, and again, we talk about that wide receiver room. I've only got him projected for 19% of the targets, Matt. Like 21% targets per route run, but that comes out to a 19% target share once you take a game away. I mean, so I feel really good about Nico. He's one of my most drafted players. In fact, like if you're in a draft and wide receivers just go super early, and guess what? It's happening. Like it's crazy, especially on Underdog. Now every format's different, but if you don't have 4 or 5 wide receivers by round 9 on Underdog, like it's FUBAR, like it's over, So when that does happen, and say some really good running back values follow you too, because you don't want to just go on ADP. It's got to be part of your process. But like let's say I've had this happen where in the first round I take Cooper Kupp, coming back down I take Tony Pollard in the second, and then I'm like like I don't really know how to pass Derrick Henry or Ramondre Stevenson. Whenever my other option is to go with Devonta Smith or T Higgins. Look, the upside case for the 2 running backs is just higher. Right? Yes, they could get hurt. So let's say you take those 2 backs, but then, everybody else just keeps taking receivers. It's going to be tough for you to catch up. So in those kind of drafts, I make Nico a priority, and I'm willing to reach as much as a round because later in the draft, there's just not many profiles that I've found that check off as many criteria as he does. There are other guys I like that check off some criteria, but he checks off the most.
Yeah, and if there's a guy that might be on that list for you to consider, but people consider very risky, and I believe the fantasy world is scared shitless of him, is Kadarius Toney. I mean, like when I profiled him this week at footballguys.com in the gut check column, and when I looked at him, you got to remember that the Chiefs, I described the Chiefs offense fantasy wise for their passing offense as this. It's a humongous tasty pie, but it's divided up into 3 pieces, essentially. 3 big pieces is essentially that, because everyone was chasing, Mecole Hardman for years. It's finally going to happen. Then it was Sky Moore. It's going to happen with Sky Moore. They made him a priority. Okay, not really. It's Travis Kelce, it's Patrick Mahomes, and it's the top wide receiver that on their board, whoever that is, whether it was Tyreek Hill or Juju Smith-Schuster. And when you look at the averages of that top receiver for the past 5 years, that was the Mahomes era. You're looking at, 124 targets, 84 catches, 68% catch percentage, almost 1,160 yards, around almost 14 yards per catch. And part of that, though, is I would say I'd say that's probably about right. And even looking at some of the higher or lowers, about 9 touchdowns, and then you also get maybe a half a touchdown on the ground. So when I look at that and I think about Kadarius Toney, is he the route runner Tyreek Hill is? Absolutely not. Is he what you would consider a primary wide receiver route runner who can win on 3rd and 15 against Jalen Ramsey in his prime, like Stephon Diggs, and Ramsey knows the routes that's coming, and he's still catching the ball? No, not yet. Maybe, but not yet, and probably not this year. But, is he also Mecole Hardman, who can't catch a cold when he's in a contested situation, who does not have specific press release skills that you would like to see from a receiver, and who, really doesn't have some route manipulation skills as a deep threat unless it's a play action zone play that gets behind the defense. And Kadarius Toney has all those things. He can win against press. He has good footwork against press from what I've seen. He can win one-on-one against defenders with his footwork and route skills. They're isolated plays, but they're there, and they've matched him up there. You see it with the Giants against Quandre Diggs. I was
about to say that if you're going to look at Kadarius Toney, you have to go look at what he did as a Giant as well, because he did get schemed up a lot more in Kansas City. And I think that's what has people scared. They're like, well, that stuff can't scale. And you're right. Like everything you're doing can't be a screen or a gadget. Like, you have to have other parts to your game, but that isn't the player he was in New York.
No.
In New York, they didn't scheme him near as much. They basically just put him out there and said, hey, beat your guy and we'll throw it to you.
But there's multiple ways that you can scheme that work with Tony that is beyond the limits of what Hardman can do. Because when you watch the way the Giants scheme him too, they'd use 3 receivers on one side, put in the middle, and let the other 2 run off the 2 shallower defenders, put him in the middle. And because he's so good at transitioning upfield in tight coverage, he's the type of receiver that will turn it upfield, hit a small crease like a running back, and turn what most receivers would have turned into a 7-yard gain after the catch into like a 21-yard gain after the catch. So you'd have those plays. Also, because he's that rushing threat, the Chiefs love to use him on the flanked as a running back, get him matched up against the safety, and throw the contested route to the same side that Travis Kelce is on. And if you're a defense, your 2 men are rolling over to Kelce, and then you do that. They also play with the tight end kind of role. Like, oftentimes you'll see 11 personnel or 2 tight ends, and you'll have Kelce on one side, and where they run those little drag routes where the tight end slants inside as if he's going to block and then breaks to the outside of the flat off of a play action roll. They'll do that, and the team expects Kelce to break back to the outside, but Kelce stays inside. The 2 linebackers slide inside, and the guy who comes across the middle behind the play action and across the field is Tony. And now he's matched up one-on-one there. Or the zone routes where he's on one side of the field and they have Kelce on like, say, the right side, they have Tony on the left, and Tony runs a deep over route, but Kelce's presence forces the defense to basically leave open a huge area behind Kelce that's wide open for Tony to cross over and catch. So there's a lot of things, even if Tony doesn't become the one-on-one, I'm going to beat you Tyreek Hill player, the way that they use him is enough that I have him projected as a better performer than Hardman this year. Like, to me, I think it's well within reason to look at him and say, will he get over 100 targets? Yeah, I think he can get over 100 targets in this offense as the 2nd highest target holder, and 80 catches and 1,000 yards. And that's, about 12 yards per catch. I'm not asking him to be, the 15, 17 yard per catch guy that sometimes Tyreek Hill was, more the early Tyreek Hill version when Hill wasn't a great route runner and still their top wide receiver in this offense. And 7 touchdowns, I don't think that's asking a lot for this offense when you look at who, how they spread things out or put things on shares. And Sky Moore, look, could become a good player, but as Matt Harmon talked about, they put him in they had him run all 3 positions or roles, and they threw a lot at him, and his game was kind of being reformatted as a rookie and learning on the go. Whereas with Tony, is known as a good student of the game. He's immature as hell. I mean, listen, he already 5, 6, 7 days ago, he's already talking about how he's putting the Super Bowl ring on his middle finger so that he could show, and that was for the entire city of New York and the New York Giants. Immature, yes.
Funny, though.
Yeah, funny. Immature that maybe that, Brian Dable said, I'm going to make an example out of him and say that look, I need to make an example of him and Kenny Golladay, 2 guys for whatever reason are just probably resting on the laurels of their talent as opposed to working to the level I want. And I'm hoping Tony will get the message, because I think it's beyond Kenny Golladay, because he got that big second contract, a fat second contract on being a protected receiver, between 2 other guys who really did open things up for him. And I think he was enabled into believing that he was a lot better of a much more complete player than he really was. I think that Dable felt like, I've got to get this team with me, and if I baby either of these 2 guys, I'm screwed as a coach for the rest of my time here. So if I have to sacrifice Tony to get my team to follow me, we'll live. And that's what I think he did. I don't think he wasn't trolling Tony, even though Tony, probably believes that. So do I think Tony has 4 or 5 more of these types of things on his track record? Could that turn into a big thing? Yes. But I'm like taking a look at it as he's got a few little things on his issues with his issues. Brett Veach thinks he can be a primary. Matt Nagy, whatever you want to say about what his years were in Chicago and what he was like as a coach, he's bought into that. Andy Reid has bought into it, I believe. You look at this team and the way they set it all up. You don't have to draft Kadarius Toney as a top 15 wide receiver, but I think that's his ceiling. I think his ceiling is actually a top 5 wide receiver. If he does show the route running acumen that we haven't seen yet week after week. But I think a safe, like a little above the midline for me, is top 15 at his position. And that's a hell of a lot higher than where he's being drafted, which is what rounds 8 to 10? So,
round 7 right now on underdog, but receivers go sooner there. So in other drafts, you're going to be seeing Kadarius Toney go in rounds 8 and 9.
And you're looking, just one last thing, you're looking at players like Darren Waller as guys that if you want to take at the end of round 6, and it depends on whether it's underdog or some other format. But there are a number of players that I look at and I go, I have just as many questions about those guys, and they have lower upside than what I see for Toney. So, yeah, for me, that might be a guy that I'd add to the list of if you draft Henry as your second back in an underdog league, can you get Toney and feel comfortable with, okay, I'll take that chance.
Yeah, and on underdog, you would be taking Kadarius Toney over a player like Jahan Dotson, and you would be taking him over a player like Treylon Burks. You would be taking him over a player like George Pickens. Those are the wide receivers going
Gladly
with him.
Gladly.
And I think I think the big thing is they all have questions. I'm drafting Treylon Burks over Toney, but I'm also factoring in the fact I know we can't predict injuries, but look, Toney, I am worried about him. It's like he jukes himself out of his own, skeletal system. The guy's always, detaching things. So
that's always been my issue with him, even pre-draft, is how inefficient he can move to hurt himself. So that's a fair point.
And so it's just mainly that. But I definitely want exposure because I think the biggest takeaway, if you're a listener, for me, is it really is the upside. So I have him projected playing the Mecole Hardman role, but all that means is how many routes I think he's getting, right? Because your target earning ability is still your target earning ability. So he's also, though, going to get his stats padded by all the gimmicky, cool things that Andy Reid will do for the player in that role, where you're just, running a jet sweep and you get the push pass, right, from Patrick Mahomes. That's a cheat code. That shouldn't be worth a point in PPR, but it is. That's the scoring. If you're playing in a PPR, you get a handoff just counted as a point for you. So there's a lot of things that go well for Toney. So I've got him projected for 50% of the routes. So that's really the Mecole Hardman role, but targets per route run at 24%. And that's just slightly below what he's been over the last 2 years as an average. But that puts him, at 10.5 points per game in PPR, 8.2.5 point PPR. I've only got him projected for 14 games, but I changed that route participation, which this is what you talked about, range of outcomes, right? If I change that route participation to 85%, and let's say those targets per route run don't gun, that's what people will contest. They will say that 24% is going to come down, and what I would point to is the film in New York. I think the film in New York actually suggests that no, he really can be a 24-25% target rate guy, period, right? And I get it. He's not a finished product. I thought Matt Harmon did a great job of breaking down the inconsistencies in Kadarius Toney's game. And he talked about how there's a lot of growth that still needs to occur. And I think that, Matt's a super sharp guy, and so I agree. There's things that have to happen, and you're talking about some of the same things. But if we give him that 85% route participation, which is totally in the range of outcomes, and then we see what that does, based on his touchdowns per route run and stuff historically, he shoots to 17.3 points per game in PPR.
Yeah.
Like that's a high end wide receiver one.
Yeah, and let's remember, Travis Kelce is the primary wide receiver in this offense. He is wide receiver one in this offense, and they use multiple tight ends to help offset that a lot of times in the game where they're split outside as well to help with Kelce. So Kadarius Toney doesn't need to be wide receiver one in this offense. He's to me, he's essentially a Devonta Smith, Jordan Addison, Calvin Ridley, arguably kind of the guy who has a bully, the big bully in the room, and he's the mouthpiece, the little mouthpiece in the schoolyard, talking a bunch of shit. Who can do some damage when he's got the big bully behind him, and AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, and guys like that. And Travis Kelce's the big bully, and Toney to me fits right in there where he's a high end wide. I think his floor is high end wide receiver too, in this offense, because again, last year Kansas City planned to spread this thing apart, and Juju Smith-Schuster is a fine NFL wide receiver, but he's not remotely a wide receiver one. He was the most productive wide receiver. And Marcus Valdes-Scantling, I mean, I'm sorry, if you still have faith in Marcus Valdes-Scantling, I don't think it's going to pay off like Mark Ingram all those years ago when people were like, betting that Ingram would one day be a running back one. I don't think Valdes-Scantling's ever going. He's that guy Dwain mentioned that runs the deep routes that you really don't want on your team. He's a picture perfect version of that. If there's a guy on this roster, if you ask me, who could wind up being the shocker and be the big name that works out well, it's Justin Ross, and he's not even a draftable player right now.
Yeah. And I think that's just the biggest question is just, is it going to be a rotation? If Kadarius Toney plays 50% of the snaps, and he's playing the Nicole Hardman role, he's still going to probably be a wide receiver 3 for your fantasy team because he's so efficient. Now, last year he was only out there 30. He only had 30. He never even really got the 30% route participation, but he was new to the team. They were still trying to integrate him into the offense. You had Juju still there, and he can take some of the snaps in the slot. So I know that we've got to move to the next guy, but I do agree. Toney, the upside is immense, and I need to draft him some more. I've usually been on a different plan where I've been needing different things for my roster. I've got some Kadarius Toney, but this is a good reminder. I'm planning on. He's in my schedule to do a piece, around projection spectrum. I like kind of plotting out the guys that have the widest range, and Toney, I think you can make an argument he might be number one on that list.
Yeah, he very well might be. All right, so we're going to go through some of our guys that we're lower on. So who are you lower on than the ADP?
This one's probably going to make you laugh because I know I was the cheerleader for this person last year, and this isn't because they burned me.
Okay.
Although maybe a little bit, but but it's Travis Etienne. And I know people say, well, how did he burn you, Dwayne? He was actually, one of the most explosive runners in the league. He had a lot of rushing yards. There are a lot of concerns with his game. He was not good inside the 5-yard line.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the data. So I use the data when I see these things. Then I go back and I watch all the plays. He was terrible. He was terrible inside the 5. It looked like he had no clue what he was doing.
Jay Moyer is smiling right now.
Oh, yeah, Jay. Yeah, Jay is doing I told you so. And he's right. He was right. I lean more into the data. I do watch the film. That's why Jay and I always work so well together, and that's why I work so well with you as well, right? We're kind of coming from our own angles, and we try to mold that together. But you guys are certainly better at the film stuff than me, right? So I do lean into people like you guys to really help me with that. But with ETN, the other area where Jay was really, really right was the fact that he's not the kind of receiver, even though his college data suggested it, he's not the kind of receiver out of the backfield that you have with an Alvin Kamara, with a CMC. And that's what you were hoping for. You were hoping for a profile of a player that, honestly, we didn't even know how many of the rushing attempts we would get. We were buying into his receiving game last year at ADP. And one of the things Jay pointed out, he said, like, look, he's not a downfield guy like Kamara, like CMC. He's not going to work angle routes, Texas routes, bullet routes. He's not going to do things that are going to be mismatches against linebackers and safeties and coverage. That's not him. He doesn't have that to his game. And he also is just, how he chooses to catch the football is just really weird. Drops don't matter that much to me, but like I couldn't help but notice them when I was watching him. I'm like, what the hell is going on with this guy? But I think Tank Bigsby coming in, man, like just to summarize it, this is a coaching staff that historically has been willing to rotate guys. Now, if you've got a really good talent, you have first round draft capital in, like you got ETN, like that, it could be overstated, right? I could be overstating Bigsby, but when you look at the problems ETN had, he was one of the least efficient guys inside the 5. Bigsby is a bigger back coming in out of Auburn. He could easily help ease the burden because they were having to use Trevor Lawrence down there. Yeah. Now, that's in vogue in the league to use your quarterback to score touchdowns. But you also got to be careful, right? You don't want them taking big hits in ranges of the field where defenses know they can just tee off because it's likely that your quarterback could run. Scrambling's different. Quarterback chooses that on their own terms. They can slide at any moment. They can just get out of bounds. But being part of design running game and high impact areas of the field, like that could still be problematic, right? Yeah. So I look at Tank Bigsby as being a true threat to take away a lot of the inside the 5 carries. And if you take that away and he's not going to be someone in the receiving game like we thought he was, I think that's just really problematic for where his ADP is. And I will tell you, if what the data shows is if you're on a team that has a lot of good receiving weapons and you're just a kind of meh guy in the target, department or, as a receiver, like you're just not going to get a lot of targets. Like you've got Calvin Ridley, you've got Zay Jones, you've got Christian Kirk, you've got Evan Ingram. They're just way better options for Trevor Lawrence to throw the ball to. And there's really no need for Jacksonville to go out of their way because they have all those weapons to try to do anything to really even integrate him into the passing game. So ETN is a guy I wouldn't mind drafting if he was going in round 5 of drafts. I still think he has big play. He has electric speed, right? He still has big play upside, and he's still young. He could mature. But I just see enough problems where we could be staring at a back that really just plays between the 20s, doesn't get involved in the receiving game, and you're really super dependent on long plays giving you your fantasy production.
Well, you're going to laugh because I've never drafted Travis Etienne in any draft format whatsoever, but I traded for him this offseason because the deal was good enough for me to have him. So I actually do have Travis Etienne as a new addition on one of my teams. So the irony cuts both ways for us.
Oh, the price can always – the price is, as Ian Hartitz always says, don't hate the player, hate the ADP.
That's right.
And that's my challenge with Etienne right now.
Yeah, and I'll add another player to the list because I'm not as high on Bigsby as some people are. I still think Dearness Johnson might have a say, and he can catch the ball. That's how he got into the league.
Well, that's the other challenge. I think ETN could actually lose the passing down duties to Dearness Johnson and lose the work inside the 5 to Bigsby.
Yeah.
I think that's in the range.
Yeah. So definitely, that was a good one to listen. One of my favorite players in the past 5-6 years at the wide receiver position is a player I'm lower on, and it's Chris Godwin. And I think that it's obvious if you listen to this podcast probably why, because I rail on Baker Mayfield relentlessly. But I just look at this offense, and the offensive line did not get better, and it basically forced Tom Brady into retirement last year.
The line will be better, though. The line was injured. I will say that. They had a ton of injuries. I don't think their offensive line is actually bad. But the challenge is I still don't think that matters. I think Baker just sucks so bad that it doesn't matter. You could literally put Fort Knox around him, and I think he would just continue to be bad.
I'm a little less confident in the line than you are, but I get but it's a valid point. And Baker is not a precision passer, and Godwin is the guy that is going to be more in that Odell Beckham role. And I don't know if Godwin's father is one of those Pop Warner coaches in the way that Beckham's father was, but we may be getting hate videos sent to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers facility for Godwin when it's all over with there. So I just look at the situation, and while he's going to be a year healthier, he's a great all-around receiver. I just don't trust this offense. If there's a player that I do like, it's going to be the player that gets the ball in ways that Baker Mayfield throws it reasonably well. And that's the deep over routes. That's the the corner or sail route, those types of things, deep comebacks. And that's Mike Evans, I think, is probably a little bit better on that end. I see his value staying a little more stable than Godwin's. So who, you can comment on that if you want to more, or we can go on to the next guy.
I can comment. Baker.
Yeah.
We can move on.
Okay.
So the next one is Michael Pittman, a player that I actually think is pretty underrated, just based on his ability to earn targets and things like that. He's been a bit unfortunate in the quarterback situation, but I think that's going to be a challenge this year. While I like Anthony Richardson, and I think that there's some really good things about his game and on tape and certain type of balls that he is really good at throwing, there's still going to be inconsistencies. It's just going to be a challenge of him continuing to progress. I don't expect all that to suddenly light switch flip on in year one and Anthony Richardson become a 65% completion rate guy, right? That's probably going to be a journey for him over his career.
Yeah.
The other factor is if historically you go back and you look at the teams that have quarterbacks with super high scramble rates, which I expect Anthony Richardson to have. Look last year, Chicago Bears, 16% scramble rate for Justin Fields. Well, what does that mean? That originally started off as a play that was intended to be a pass, but the quarterback decided, because looking at the talent around him and whatever the breakdown of the player, whatever happened, I'm probably just the best option to take off and just go freaking score. Like Justin Fields, just go score like an 80-yard touchdown. Like, you don't get guys like this. We're getting more of them now. But Anthony Richardson is that kind of guy. Like, he is the kind of guy that can just take off, and take, get 60 yards, and score a touchdown. He can run past somebody, run over somebody. He's just, he's an elite athlete. So what happens is that turns that pass play into a run play. And now all of a sudden, so if you've got a scramble rate of 16%, and let's say your team was trying to throw the ball 60% of the time, well, you do the math. That just means you're not going to throw the ball very much. And the Bears did not last year. So having someone that scrambles this much typically means, like, at best, you're going to be like a 55% drop back rate, right?
Yeah.
55% pass rate. But your drop back rate, it can be a little higher than that. So the scrambles really factor in for me. He's also going to be, Anthony Richardson will also be involved in the design run game with Jonathan Taylor. He'll probably account for 20% of their design rushing attempts. That's another trait that if you see that really causes teams to be run heavy. And guess what? It also causes teams that even when they're trailing, when they have these two factors going, most of the time, big trailing scripts will push a team to need to pass the ball a lot more. Now, it's all relative. It will force the Colts to throw a little bit more whenever they're trailing, and Vegas projects them to be trailing quite a lot this year. But they're going to stay more true to the run game. So even though it will make them throw a little bit more, it's just not going to be enough. And when you factor all that together and you look at Michael Pittman, like, he's had a 70% catch rate over the last 2 years. That's coming down.
Yeah.
So you're going to have an offense with depressed passing volume. You're going to have an offense where he's not going to have as high an accurate of a quarterback. That's going to hurt. So I think those factors together, I think I've drafted Michael Pittman twice. And I like the player, but like the situation is enough that at ADP, I'm just pivoting to other players. And he goes in that range with guys like what you just talked about, Chris Godwin. So you certainly have questions in that area of the draft. But honestly, I go back to a name that we've already talked about. Like, when I get in that range and I see Chris Godwin and I see Michael Pittman on the board, I just take Jaxon Smith-Njigba.
There you go.
Just like, because I think they're going to be similar. And I think JSN just has more upside. I think there's more weight. Like, Seattle's offense could just go off. Right. And then being the wide, even if he's the third guy in the offense, like, it could be enough. And I look at these players like Pittman, and I struggle to find a way to get him to where he needs to be in projections to really say, hey, you should spend that pick on him in round 5 of your drafts.
Yeah. I mean, I have Anthony Richardson at a 59% completion percentage.
And that's being generous.
Under 3. Well, and it probably is, but I'm higher on him than most. And I'm close to 3,000 yards passing. Not quite there, and closer to 800 yards rushing this year. So, I think it's going to be a good rookie year for him, but it's kind of be more of a good Josh Allen-esque rookie type of year. I like.
He'll probably be a top 12 quarterback just because of his running.
Yeah.
But his ability to support the rest of the offense is really where our concerns come in.
So I have a riddle for you, Dwain. What is cylindrical shaped, green and white, and says Jets on it. It's a
Brees Hall.
Hey, Brees Hall. That actually, I was gonna say the waste paper basket or the trash can in Green Bay, because basically you've got Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers who've been sent there, and when you look at this offensive line, and I just don't know if it's again another unit that I'm just like not very confident in, and they have great skill talent if you want to call, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, and quarterbacks skill talent. They're great skill talent. Offensive line to support it, not confident in that. Brees Hall, to me, when you look at that combination, and he's coming back from an ACL tear, I don't see how he's going to play more than 10 games. So I know that projecting injury is problematic, but when I look at, I don't know, there aren't many players who come back from an ACL tear at the running back position and kill it like Adrian Peterson. They generally have some compensatory injury that limits them on some level, whether they play every game and they're just not quite where they need to be, or they miss multiple games. And I just look at Hall and the way he runs, and it's hard. And I look at that offensive line, and it's hard for me to project him as a player who's going to play even 12 games this year. So the games he plays, yeah, I've got him at over 5 yards per attempt and about 5 touchdowns and close to 30 receptions. But I'm looking at a player who's maybe going to have 800 total yards this year. I don't think I think this is a wait till next year player, or wait till the end of the year type of player. And hopefully they still have Aaron Rodgers at that point, when he is available to get on the field.
I love him. But I will tell you, I'm leaning a lot into, and this is one of the cool things about our industry, right? Yeah. We've got so many medical professionals.
Yeah.
That are putting out really good content, right? Different levels, some doctors, right? Some, that are not, that work in the field
or things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so 3 of the people I listen to the most in this area, project Brees Hall to be ready to rock. Now, could start slow, to your point, but based on like factors of his athleticism, his age, and how they bucket out these players that have had these injuries, that Brees Hall should be good to go this year. Now, is he going to be 100% of what he was last year? No, but he can be one of the exceptions that could be like around 90% of what we saw. So for me, the other part is at ADP. Once you get to the end of round 3, which is where Brees Hall often slips to, it's like, okay, like I could take, some of these older wide receivers that are slipping there, other wide receivers that have questions, or I can take a swing, on a guy like Brees Hall. And the other thing is, especially if I'm playing in best ball trying to win a $3 million contest, I want the guy that's coming on at the end of the year. I want Brees Hall. I want week 15, 16, and 17 version of Brees Hall. So I'm not as pessimistic about his games. In fact, like I haven't projected at 15, like all the rest of my running backs. But again, that's based off of content that I'm consuming from other people that I think are just smarter than me about injuries. Now that same group of people is very worried about Javonte, so I've stayed away from Javonte. But on Brees Hall, I've definitely bought in. Like like looking at what he did in college, and then for that little bit of that we got last year, like if he hadn't been hurt, he would probably be my running back 2 this year.
Yeah,
might be my running back 1 overall.
Yeah, I love his talent. I've always loved his talent. But the thing about his talent is that he is a hard-cutting, dynamic, moving back who is very instinctive. And the one thing that, there's one guy that I always listened to when it came to injuries. And while, he's not doing much this year at this point, our buddy Gene Bramall. And the one thing that I always heard from Gene was it's that they may be 95%, they may even be 100%. But at 100%, they may not be 100% in their mind confident about that leg. And when you have a guy who plays that dynamically in terms of their movement, leans on the movement that much, the hardest thing for that to come back, even when the leg is perfectly healthy, is the confidence to do everything that you used to do on it. And when you don't do it, you're just pulling back a little bit because you just don't trust it yet. Even though it's there, even the doctor's telling you it's there, you don't trust it yet. That's when those compensatory injuries pop up because you're not doing what you should be doing on it. So I think I'm rooting for the 15 games or the 16 games, and I hope that the guys that you're listening to are right on that end. So it's just a tough call. I mean, for me on that end, Dynasty.
Well, the other thing I think about is like in that range of the draft, I try to think about like what's the thing I can't get later. I can't draft a guy like Breece Hall later. Like there's not one. Like so. It's not every roster, and I'm not like way overweight versus the field on Breece Hall, but I definitely want my exposure to him if I'm going to draft a bunch of teams like what I'm doing, right now. So we can. I
could joke that Trey Sermon might be that guy, but that's for another conversation. How about who's the third guy that you're lower on? Or are we on the second?
Well, actually, I wanted to throw one of the ones I'm the most uncertain about, and get your thoughts as a person, that watches the film way more than me, and that's Elijah Moore. So Elijah Moore has just really got a wide range of outcomes. Like, so if we say we see last year's version of Elijah Moore and we see last year's version of Deshaun Watson, like you'll be sick at your stomach that you spent your 7th or 8th round pick on Elijah Moore. However, if we get rookie season Elijah Moore and we get vintage Deshaun Watson, which is more where I'm leaning, and it sounds like you are as well, you're going to have a player that you're like, wow, I've got a wide receiver 2 with potential wide receiver 1 upside, and I drafted him in round 8. So just very opposite ends of the spectrum in what we saw in the rookie season for Elijah Moore and what we saw last year. Like his targets per route run dropped from 24% to 12%. Like that, you don't see that very often. You don't see guys do that well as a rookie, especially guys that we liked coming out of college that graded well there as well, suddenly just become bad in year 2. And to be honest, there's so few of them, it's really hard to say, oh, well, here are his comps, because like all of them kind of have different circumstances. It's not like we have a list of 30 guys that have done this. Like my data going back to 2011 where I'm tracking this stuff, I've got like 3 or 4 names that it's just not a big enough sample. So I just kind of throw it out. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm leaning into the fact that I think that this Browns offense will be one of the most improved in the league in the passing department. And so I've been taking him, but I will tell you, I'm a little queasy about it because I don't know, like I can't quantify like what happened to him and how things got so bad as a target earner. Yes, he fell out of favor with the coaching staff. That I can be like, well, fine, whatever. I'll see what he does with the next coaching staff. That doesn't bother me. It bothers me, but that's overcomeable. What bothers me is that he couldn't get targeted, and he had been so targeted the year before, and we know talent is the biggest driver, your quarterback throwing it to you. Now, I get it. He's playing with Zach Wilson, but none of the quarterbacks for the Jets targeted him when he was out there. So it wasn't just Zach Wilson, so that concerns me.
Yeah, I have more about 10 spots lower than ADP right now overall, but again, I agree with you that the range of outcomes is very wide, and there can be multiple dimensions in which that happens. Because if David Bell gets cut, and he isn't involved as a tertiary or fringe target, and Marquise Goodwin is normally what he is, which is injured and plays 2 games or whatever, or is just kind of one of those deep threats that occasionally gets looked. Or Cedric Tillman is slow to acclimate on some level. If you just combine a good chunk of what I've projected for those guys, just as people that really aren't fantasy factors, and added on to what I have for Moore, he's probably a wide receiver, high-end wide receiver 3, if not a low-end wide receiver 2, just right there. Then if you take Donovan Peoples-Jones and say, you know what, move aside. You're now the afterthought in this offense. But you're on the field, but you're an afterthought. Elijah Moore's usurping a lot of your target share there. You might be looking, and then if you combine it with some of the other players going by the wayside that I mentioned, you could be looking at a 1,000-yard receiver, in this offense who, like you said, is a very solid fantasy starter. Right now, I've got him at a conservative mark because I just want to see how it shakes out. But what we've seen thus far in OTAs, he's the most targeted player in the offense. Then they're moving him around a lot and doing a lot with him. So
Did
he's
you
a
see
player that will
anything with
probably
him
rise.
last year that just
Bothered me?
yeah, like
No.
versus what you saw in year one?
No, I just saw Zach Wilson, and it was, that was,
And you turned the TV
and
off.
I saw it and held my nose while I was doing the work. No, seriously, it's hard to judge with a guy like Wilson because Wilson's always looking downfield, and then with Mike White, you have to remember too, he's not as experienced either. So as heady as he may have played within what your expectations would have been, he was also kind of looking downfield or scrambling. So I also think that Moore just was kind of X'd out of the offense so much, even in probably when they installed in OTAs and practices, he probably just wasn't a highly targeted player, so nobody really had a great rapport with him.
So that was obviously the part that frustrated him because
Yeah.
he saw this coming because he was upset very early in the year.
Yeah. I mean, him and Denzel Mims both have if they have chips the size of Mount Rushmore on their shoulders based on what's happened with them in New York. And I think Moore probably has a bigger case, even though Mims said what he said and then stepped out there. They put him in the game in the final preseason game and he balled out and then they used him more than they used Elijah Moore last year. And I watched some of those targets he got, and they were not great. So yeah, I'm with you on that end. I'll just mention this. I'm lower on Bijan Robinson than most, but not significantly so. But just on a level, well, I guess significantly so in the fact that a lot of people see him as a top 5 back right off the bat, like he's LaDainian Tomlinson. And
he's the third running back off the board right now.
yeah, exactly. And I have him at the bottom half of the top 10. Really, actually, like 10th or 11th. And for me, Atlanta's offensive line is good. Fine, that's great. Desmond Ritter's a big question mark, and also in the red zone. Are they going to use him the way that you would expect them to use him, or are they going to use a 230-pound Cordero Patterson who's performed pretty well in that stretch, or Tyler Algier? How are they going to split this apart? So for me, it's a little bit about how I see the upside for Robinson there, but are they going to be in those situations offensively enough to give Robinson the touchdowns that are going to put him over the top as a top 5 back? And I just don't trust Desmond Ridder enough right now to say I'm going to draft with confidence him as a top 5 player, even if he has top 5 ability.
Yeah. I have some of the same concerns. I still love Bijan, so yeah. I mean, I'm taking him, but usually, like lately, I've been really testing it. So I've let him go a lot of times at the end of round 1, which is where he goes, and I'll just take the receiver.
Yeah.
And then they'll let him come back around to me, and I'm like, okay, great. I'll take him at the beginning of round 2.
Easily.
Not taking him at the end of round 1 all the time like I was early on. Now, early on, he was the number 2 running back.
Yeah.
And that was something I had a real problem with and talked a lot about how Austin Eckler should absolutely be above, Bijan, as far as like who we're taking in the first round. But I have some of the same concerns. We know the range of outcomes is like the high end on them is elite for Bijan. If Arthur Smith just says, nope, I don't think Tyler Algier is good, and I don't care about Cordero Patterson anymore, and I want to use Bijan Robinson the way I did Derrick Henry.
Beautiful.
He could be the running back 1.
Yeah.
Like he could be the running back 1. So that upside is there. However, Arthur Smith has shown us that he will do very perplexing things. Like not having Kyle Pitts on the field, not having Drake London on the field, in an offense that just didn't really have a lot of weapons. I think actually Arthur Smith is a good play caller. I think he's good at sequencing plays. I think we give him a hard time, but my main issue with him is the perplexing things he does with his talent, especially on a team that doesn't have a lot of it, right? So I could see a scenario where Bijan Robinson, gets 55% of the rushing attempts. So there is some floor here. Like I haven't projected at 65, like the high end would be 75, but I've got Algier at 22%. I've got Cordero Patterson at 8%, and I've got Cordero Patterson though taking 40% of the routes. Yeah. Which means Bijan's not going to be out there for 65% like a lot of people are projecting. Like I think that's a real spot. And people are falling into the trap right now, man. They're moving Bijan all over the formation. Guys, they do that with every freaking player in mini camps. Every guy has to be, even if they're only going to run a route from the slot 5 times all season, they still have to practice it. Yeah. It doesn't mean because that's the thing they let the beat reporter see and you're hearing about. Like, it doesn't mean
punt returns or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, it's just like, God, it drives me nuts. But anyway, like Bijan, the upside is that they just let him roll, right? 70% of the rushing attempts. He's the primary passing down back. It is all on the table, and that could give you that running back 1 overall upside. But I think Tyler Algier showed enough last year, and Cordarrelle Patterson has shown enough over the last couple of years and we've seen Atlanta be willing to use a rotation. And guys, they're going to run the ball a lot. So when you have the other guys, and you can help keep your other player fresh that you just invested a high-end first-round pick in, I think there's a lot of ways that this could go a little bit wrong for Bijan. Yeah. I think you'll still be happy with him, but you'll be looking at it going, like, was it really worth like my first-round pick? I think you could be concerned. Look, I'm still happy to take him at the end of the first. I've gotten so much of him that I have been diversifying a little bit, but I'm totally with you on the question.
Yeah, because, I mean, in long build formats for Dynasty, he's my number 6 player overall, my number 1 running back on the board. Like, if you're drafting to build a Dynasty team, Bijan Robinson should be among your top 6 players. That's my thought.
I think you can make an argument he's number 1.
Like you could if you're depending on your league type, for sure. So let's just kind of quick hit some of these. Give me like a player you're lower on, and just like maybe 10-15 seconds as to why.
Yeah, Juju is my biggest one, and I just don't think he's very good, to be honest. Like, his data really suggests that he's a wide receiver 4 or 5 fantasy kind of player, like his target earning and everything. And he's obviously got injury stuff going on. The other thing is he hasn't really been able to practice yet. I'm also concerned, like, how's the offense going to work, right? You've got Mike Gesicki, who's a slot player. You got Juju Smith, who's a slot player. You've got Kendrick Bourne, who's more of a slot Z kind of. These guys are all fighting for the same role in an offense that might not be very good. So I'm 27 spots below ADP on Juju.
There you go. All right. So I'm going to give you 3 players in quick fashion that I'm uncertain about, but I want to end it with the player that I'm most uncertain about, but I'm also highest on. So Curtis Samuel, I'm uncertain about. I haven't projected pretty high right now, but how much, whether it's Jacoby Brissett or Sam Howell, depending on how well Howell plays to begin the year, is a big question mark. I wonder about whether or not Jahan Dotson is going to make that big of a, is going to have the growth to really cut into what Samuel does, or whether this offense can support multiple guys. And then Samaje Perine. I've always been a Samaje Perine fan. I think with Javonte Williams, like you mentioned, there's questions about him in Denver. I think I heard you say this, and I love the comparison of like saying he's a Pierre Thomas type back in terms of how he'll be used. And I'm high on Perine because I see him getting the red zone role and getting the green zone touches where he could have 10 touchdowns. And but that makes his projecting that doesn't give me a lot of confidence to say that a lot of his, value is going to come in the red zone off of touchdowns. So that's one there. And then Devontae Adams, obviously one of the great route runners in the game. But when I see Josh McDaniel get rid of Derek Carr, who Adams wanted to play with, I look at them bring in Jimmy Garoppolo, bring in Jacoby Myers, and then bring in Philip Dorsett, and I think, what's red, white, and blue and cylindrical and sitting in or actually what's black, silver, and black and sitting in the New England Patriots office, and that's a trash can with the Oakland Raiders insignia on it, or the Las Vegas Raiders insignia on it. And I just think this is a guy in Josh McDaniels who is so scheme attached to his, ego attached to his scheme, that he maybe loses sight of the value of the actual personnel that executes it. And I'll just bring in some of my guys. Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm sorry, is not a good quarterback. he's a good quarterback. He's not a good NFL starting quarterback. He's just below competent, if you ask me, unless he has a great team around him, and then he's just above competent. You know, and I just look at that and I think it's hard. I just see this as being a potential disaster where Adams will want out by midseason, and him and McDaniels have a massive blow up. But the guy I'm most uncertain about, who I have fourth in my rankings right now, and it looks ridiculous to me, but I'm just staying true to it because it's early July. Cam Akers. Cam Akers is my number 4 back, just above Nick Chubb. I watched that guy's tape last year with a bum offensive line and no quarterback to speak of, and he looked fantastic. He was such a good decision maker. What he was doing looked like the Cam Akers you were hoping he would become out of Florida State. I was so impressed with what I saw as a player. And now that I look at, with Matthew Stafford back, the offensive line, I'm not seeing much better than, much mode for improvement there, which is the biggest concern for me. And whether McVay will actually lean on Cam Akers enough. I know Sony Michel's back, but I think that's more of a coach on the field with some of the young guys that they have, especially when you think of, Kyron Williams, who is a borderline NFL running back with some receiving skills. Ronnie Rivers is probably a better all-around back, if you ask me, whether they realize it or not. I'm a huge Zach Evans fan as a player, as a talent. And I think he could be what people hoped Sony Michel would be before they found out about the injuries. But Akers, to me, could be a huge cog in this offense. And if you look at that offense right now, and it's Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, and then I have to think that Akers could wind up being, that all-around player who could give you that upside.
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible. I mean, yeah, you're making me super nervous though, where you got him ranked.
Oh, it's unbelievably high. It's nervous for me when I look at it.
Yeah, the challenge for Akers, and while he did look better last year, he still, when you compare like his measurable stuff, is like it's not elite. Right. And so I worry about that. I also worry just about McVay. He and McVay are like Ross and Rachel, like on Friends, on again, off again. Like that, it's so frustrating. And then I look at the offense. Like I have Cam Akers more like in my RB20 range. I just think there's too many questions. I think the ceiling case is that depth chart is terrible. The Rams get better and he gets everything. And even if he's not like super, super efficient, like he, could score 10, 12 touchdowns and you're super happy that you have him on your roster. But I think there's a lot of other ways that it potentially goes wrong. And some of my biggest mistakes I've made historically have been, honestly, whenever I've looked at a backfield and been like, well, none of these other guys can get any carries. Like, so I'm just going to put them all here. Unless it was a player with absolute bonkers talent, then I would always feel better about that. Like I would feel better about saying Nick Chubb gets 80%, right, of the Browns offense because he's so good versus Cam Akers getting like 60%. So that's a challenge for me. But I think you've got him graded at I think your forecast, that's a ceiling projection, right? I think if I'm looking at a median projection, I bring him down from there. But I think you're certainly talking about the case of what happens if everything goes right for him. And I will say, watching him, he did look like a player that honestly, he looked very motivated.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, I finally got my chance again. I'm not going to take it for granted. I don't want to let my coach take me off the field is what it felt like.
Yeah. I think if Zach Evans has a strong camp, Cam Akers is moving down a fair bit for me. He'll probably be running back 18 to running back, somewhere around.
Well, the beauty of this, no one has to draft him that high, but
not
with
remotely.
You saying what you're saying, he should just be a priority in like your round 7.
That's right.
You can get Cam Akers right now in round 7 of drafts.
Yeah, because I see his upside is getting about 325 touches, overall. And I don't think it's unreasonable to expect him to get 30 catches in this offense. I don't think he's going to be a 50 catch player. But if he is a 50-catch player, look out. If he's getting 50 or more.
He did get more involved in the passing game last year. And it's going to happen because you don't have 3 weapons anymore. You just have Cooper Kupp.
Yeah.
And then you have Tyler Higbee is really the second best thing, right? Then it's Van Jefferson.
Yeah.
And then after that, like, I think
Puka
it probably
Nacua?
is. Maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
But I mean, like, is he even going to get on the field enough? I don't know.
Right.
Like, so anyway, I think there's a chance that Akers is the 3rd, 4th target, in the offense. I think that is in his range of outcomes. Again, because like you don't have to be the best receiving back ever if your quarterback doesn't have other options. That just moves you up in the pecking order. So I've got him projected for 29 catches, and that's my median projection. So being conservative.
Yeah, I have him for 31, 281 yards, and honestly, I think he's a natural ball catcher. I thought he was one of the best ball catchers in his class coming out at the running back position. So, anybody else that you were uncertain of, or are we going to call it quits today?
No, yeah, I think we've hit them all. Yeah. To be honest, yeah, but this has been good. I love the Samaje Perine thing. Like that is a guy that I've been drafting quite a bit. I get the uncertain. I think you got to think about all the ranges. The other nice thing with Samaje is really early in the year, I do expect it to be a big ramp-up time for Javonte Williams. Like, I think you're probably going to get weeks where he's not playing, and then you're going to move into a phase of where they start to ramp him up. And my guess is it's more like a J.K. Dobbins thing where the ramp-up is never, hey, you're going to get full Javonte this year. So I think this year especially, Samaje Perine probably picks up, even once Javonte's back, a larger role than what we would typically expect. Because of just the nature of what the Broncos are dealing with, and we've just seen Sean Payton willing to do that in the past, so it all really makes a lot of sense. And if for some reason Javonte creates one of those compensatory injuries you talked about, later in the season you might pick up a 3 or 4 game stretch where it's just Samaje Perine. So, and I think the Broncos they're my pick to be the most improved offense in the NFL this year. I just think people are too quick to jettison on Russell Wilson. I know he's a goofball, but I mean, this still is a guy that was a high-end quarterback very recently, right? And to think that 1 year he's completely done and washed, and now you get to pair him with Sean Payton, one of the best play callers in the game. And last year the receivers were never healthy together. You lost Tim Patrick before the season started. Cortland Sutton was on and off the field playing injured. Jerry Jeudy was on and off the field playing injured. Greg Dulcich started to kind of show something, then he got hurt, and he didn't get to start the season because he was hurt. So any combination of those guys are just on the field together. Now you sprinkle in some Denzel Mims, and you get Perine working in the screen game. I just, I think there's a ton of upside for the Broncos offense, and I've drafted a lot of Russell Wilson because like he goes in like round 13, 14.
Everybody's been shitting on Russell Wilson on one level to the next from the time he got into the league. And, it just got to a fever pitch last year. I certainly wrote a lot about it, saying it was a bunch of cool kids at the lunch table who were upset. And I've joked that, I mean, the reason one of the leading people who led this charge was just upset and literally said on national TV or on his podcast, Kyle Brandt, that a lot of this stemmed from the fact that Russell Wilson wouldn't grant him an interview with Sierra at a red carpet event because his wife was tired and he was trying to protect his wife's thing, but then went on to like bash him on NFL Network like the next day, talking about how he was a phony, and it would just hit the fever pitch. And it's just like, I don't care whether he was a phony or not.
Yeah,
I just care about whether he can play.
The Subway commercials didn't help him.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, I don't care. It's like, I don't care about that. I just care what he does on the field. And when you look at what he did on the field.
He got hot at the end of the year. He started feeling it.
At the beginning of the year, too, there were multiple drops. I charted those games. There were multiple drops of very accurate passes and multiple likely touchdowns dropped. And not even on the same drive, like in different drives that would have had the outcomes of games be different and his production be different. So, at the end of the day, when all of that stuff happened that you described, it's hard for a quarterback not to wind up like packing it in a bit or just not playing well, overall, because everything's springing a leak. So, yeah, I'm with you. but we've profiled Wilson a lot when we've done shows in the past together. So folks know that we have a healthy respect for what he can do on the field when things are working out. But things always work out when we get together. So this has been a terrific show, and I appreciate the generosity of your time for our listeners to once again get to hear our thoughts on these players. And you can find Dwain at Fantasy Life, of course, at Dwain McFarland on Twitter. You can find me at Matt Waldman on Twitter, and of course at footballguys.com. And I just turned to Twitter real quickly and saw Jay Moyer talking about AI, and it made me laugh. So we'll that's a little message for Dwain in our conversation before this show. See y'all later.